We built this city, bow, bow. We built this city, bow, bow. We built this city on boards and foam. Yeah! Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Weird Project. In this episode, I guide you through the process I took to make a set of modular gaming tiles. These are meant to be city blocks that you would arrange at the start of a game, maybe a war game like Warhammer 40,000 or a role-playing game. They're kind of like the stage on which your game takes place. Then you set the stage later with terrain pieces, smaller things that you've made, and finally your miniatures that go on and fight their little battles. Making a set like this has been a dream of mine for a long time, ever since I first started getting into the hobby like 20 years ago. So finally jumping in has got me really excited. Let's go check it out. So to start off this project, I had some big pieces of plywood, about 3/4 inch plywood, and a friend of mine helped me cut them down using his table saw. So we got them cut down to 12 inches by 12 inches. First thing I did was to get my carpenter square out and make sure they were still square and roughly 12 inches on a side. And they came out pretty good. They're square on each angle, and the sides are pretty close to 12 inches, a little bit short here and there, maybe one was a little bit over. But for what I want to do here, it's just fine. So the next thing was just to sand the sides and the edges to get all the little splinters off, make sure I wasn't going to jab myself when I was handling these, putting them together. This is, I think, 150 grit sandpaper. Honestly, I didn't really do a whole lot here, just enough to just rough off any little jags. Now I knew I wanted several different shapes of city block on each tile because I wanted to be able to lay them out in different configurations. So the small squares you see here, that's the simplest thing to do. But then if every tile was like that, it would be kind of boring. There'd be very little variation in the size of buildings you could put on the thing, and you just create a grid of firing lanes in any given battle game that you're playing. So I wanted something, to break things up. Longer blocks, big corners, big huge blocks. You'll see those at the end when it all comes together. So with the plan in mind for the different kind of shapes I wanted, I took some MDF outside. This is what I plan to use to make the raised beds on each block. I marked off the first 10-inch line across the short length, got my jigsaw out, and just, went for it, and yeah, so the blade came out. The jigsaw vibrated a lot. And so the blade came out and it pushed the MDF around, knocked around the supports. So I decided it was time to get the circular saw out. I had not wanted to use it originally because I thought it might be too much for this job, but it vibrated a heck of a lot less, and I was able to, trim off that gnarly edge right away. So I got everything ready to make the first cut across, finalizing one square, and it was kind of not great. Because around this time I decided maybe handheld power tools and I just don't mix. If you zoom way in, you can see the pure terror in my eyes when I go to check if I've destroyed my phone.
And the phone still works.
I did get one square though, so that's a win, right? I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's not going to match anything else. Quick tip, stay hydrated. I decided to go with foam board for the pieces. It's pretty readily available. It's essentially styrofoam sandwiched between two pieces of paper. You can get it at most any art store or office supply store or something like that. A lot of crafters recommend the stuff from the Dollar Tree because the paper is really easy to get off compared to basically every other brand. I wasn't able to find it at Dollar Tree, so I got this for $5 at Bi-Mart, a locally owned, employee-owned store that I enjoy going to. So I marked out the lines and started cutting. Went pretty well. I've got this retractable utility knife. I like this because cutting foam is pretty hard on blades, and so these retractable knives have little snap-off blades, so when one piece starts to get worn down, you just snap it off and you got a new one that's nice and sharp. You can use an X-Acto knife for this, but the blade on the X-Acto knife is, one-off. You're gonna wear it out and then need a new blade, and they can be kind of expensive compared to these retractable snap-off ones. So once I got a few of these cut out, I decided to lay them out and just kind of see how they looked on some of the tiles. And I gotta say, I was really getting excited about this because they pretty much looked exactly like I wanted them to. The long blocks come together and give you a real illusion of a one big block on the tile. The big corner looks good. It'll look a lot better when it's together with the other three corners, making one huge block, but still, this looks pretty good. Once I got all the shapes cut out, I needed to start figuring out how to place them on the tiles. If you'll remember, not all the tiles are exactly 12 inches. In fact, only 2 of them ended up being exactly 12 inches. To my friend that helped me cut them, not your fault, not a big deal. But I did want each piece to be centered on the tile where it needs to be centered. For example, the small squares need to be exactly centered so that they're an equal distance from each side, as far as it goes. They're kind of rectangular, but it's not a big deal. The ones that go to the edge need to go to that edge, obviously, but be otherwise centered. So I figured the best way to do that would be to find the center of each tile by drawing 2 diagonal lines across it where they meet. That's the center. That's just basic geometry. And then go and mark exactly how far away from the center point each one needs to be based on the size of the tile. So for example, the small squares are 8 inches across, so it needs to be 4 inches away from the center in each direction. So I just marked this out using carpenter square and a combination square, make sure I got all the angles right and everything lined up properly. Once the square is marked out, it's a simple matter of taking the tile I have ready, getting some glue out. This is wood glue. I'm not sure if I would use this again in this situation, but that'll be part of the lessons learned section later. Anyway, put some healthy dose of glue on there, spread it all around, make sure you got good coverage. And once you're ready, you flip it over, you get it centered in the lines you marked, and just kind of hold it there for a little bit. Make sure it stays. It might travel a little bit. Keep an eye on it for a few minutes, and if it starts to move, just kind of gently nudge it back, and hopefully it'll end up where it is. All of mine stayed pretty much where I wanted them by the end. Next step I wanted to do was to add some texture to the roads, make them rougher, so I used this joint compound. It should be pretty easy to get at any hardware store, or even just a general store that has a small hardware section. The consistency is somewhere between yogurt and soft butter. You're going to want to have a scraper like I've got here, a spreader, to put it on. And you want to get the edges of the foam to help protect them when you spray paint. And then go around and get the actual road surface. If you've never worked with this stuff before, and it's been a long time for me, it takes a little practice to get used to putting it on, how much to put on your spreader, how to angle it to get it in the right spot on the edges. Doing the road surface is a lot easier than doing the edges. The best advice I can give for this part is to just experiment a lot with angles, how much you put on, how you approach it, and you'll find something that works for you. It doesn't take very many tries. This is probably tile number 1 here, and eventually on tile number 4 I figured out a good rhythm for the edges. When you go to start putting it on the actual road surface, this is another place to experiment. I started out trying to put on a thin layer, but not too thin. I wanted to not be able to see the wood grain through the material. And I think ultimately that turned out to be the wrong way to go. By the end of the project, I was using very thin layers because the result was that when using the sponge to add the texture, I got much smaller ridges of material, much smaller pock marks, and it's a lot finer detail. It works a lot better, looks more like a road, honestly. Otherwise, with the big grains, it kind of looked like craters, like little craters. And I didn't really feel like that result was quite road-like. You're not going to be able to tell from 2 feet away on the tabletop, but you'll know deep inside, in your soul. To start adding the texture into the joint compound, picked up a piece of kitchen sponge. You should be able to get this just about anywhere. And you just kind of start dabbing into it, just slapping down. Try to go as much as you can purely vertical. If you get any kind of horizontal motion when you're at the piece, when you're touching the piece, you're going to get more of a smear than an indentation. So just go around, take your time. You can go back over it a lot. You've got a lot of working time with this material. Even 10-20 minutes later, it'll still be a bit tacky and you can kind of come at it again. I switched up sides on the sponge, using the face, using the edges. I think ultimately the edges did the best for me, mostly because I felt like I had a lot better hand control than using the face of the sponge. And you can see here, as I hold it up, you can see the kind of texture I'm going for. This is actually a pretty good example. I let that dry overnight and then took it outside to prime it with black. This is just plain Rust-Oleum, fairly affordable. The footage I shot of painting the gray onto the pads unfortunately got corrupted or something, not exactly sure what happened. So I don't have that to show you. I'll just quickly say I just sponged on different levels of gray, really just two, like a dark gray and a light gray. Ended up swirling them around a lot. I was going for a sort of a concrete pad look. I don't know how well I did. Some of them look better than others. I wanted to add some color to the road surface, a little bit of a warm tone to contrast with the gray pads. So I got a dark brown and a light brown. First came in with the dark brown and did kind of a heavy pass, pretty wet. Then mixed in the light brown to about a 50-50 ratio. Went back over those areas again. Lighter, but not quite a dry brush. Finally came in with just the light brown as a dry brush. There's a little bit of streaking here, but you can kind of blend that in while it's still wet. The overall effect is okay. It adds a little bit of lighter spots, which is probably pretty natural. The overall effect is fairly muted in the end. I might use a little bit heavier, maybe a little bit lighter colors next time if I do it again. To sell the look of a real road, a paved road, I wanted to add lane lines on each exposed edge, each road edge of the tile, so that when you put them together, they would come together and form one lane. It would look like one road, straddling two tiles. In order to do this consistently across all the tiles, I decided I would make a template for the lane markers and use spray paint to put them on. So here I'm sketching out about how I want them to look, trying to find a nice even distribution, and it ended up being with a 1/2 inch of road at each corner. Each lane marker inside of that is 1 inch long, and each gap is 1 inch long. So when the corners come together, you get 1 whole inch lane line. I also made the gaps a 1/4 inch deep, meaning the lane lines would end up a 1/2 inch wide when you put them together. Ultimately, I feel like this was too thick. Then I just measured out on the actual plastic card I was going to use for the template the dimensions that I had, and it was pretty simple. Just measure it out, draw it out, and then I came in with my X-Acto knife to cut out the bits. So it's all cut out, and I bring out a tile just to lay it against the edge and see how the fit looks. Looks pretty good, nice and even, once you get it straight, of course. To get ready to spray this, we tape it down with masking tape, or this is first aid paper tape, basically the same. You want to make sure you get the edges and try to make sure that they're aligned with the cutout on the corner. That way, if your template isn't quite wide enough for this particular tile, the tape acts as kind of an extender to make sure that lane stays straight. You can also see I taped one of the teeth here. By the end of the whole process, I was taping all 6 just to make sure there was a good seal. I had a little bit of paper to protect the rest of the tiles so that you don't get white paint on your nice gray raised pad or your muddy streets. And then we're back with our basic Rust-Oleum. This is white. We're going to use it to paint the lane lines, and it doesn't take very long at all for one side of the tile. Just a couple quick passes, pretty light on it. I stayed fairly close because I actually do want this to pool a little bit. I feel like that kind of adds to this was painted by a heavy roller look. Now remember when I said this doesn't take long for one side of the tile? Well, when you got 14 tiles with varying numbers of sides, 1 to 4, it does take a while. So I want to thank my friend Terry Bradshaw here for hanging out with me while I went through this process. You really got me through it, buddy. Thanks. The end result here on one of the tiles, just one edge, you can see. I think it came out well. The template did its job. We got some nice clean lines. Down at the end, you can see a little bit of spillage onto the black part where I didn't want it. It's pretty easy to come back with some black paint afterwards and just cover that up. Here you can see me dry fitting 2 pieces together. This is the first time I did it, and I was initially super pleased. The lane markers really pop. As I mentioned earlier, they are a little bit thick, and I would probably do it a bit differently next time. Most likely an 1/8 inch on the template, so the lane lines themselves when they come together are a 1/4 inch thick. So here you can see most of them together on the table. There's 2 in the chair at the back of the shot there. They're 2 thick ones that go between the big corners. So these are 12. This makes a nice 3x4, which is big enough for all but the largest games of 40K, the 2,000 point games. Seeing them all together on the table like this was the realization of a long dream. I know this might seem silly, but I've always wanted to do this, to have tiles that you could rearrange, build sort of any battlefield layout you wanted. And I'm planning to do more. I'm planning to do grasslands, icy lands, hellscapes maybe, I don't know, or hexscapes, sorry kids. I really want to do a set that has a river cutting through it. I'll probably use foam to do that, cut down into the foam rather than build up the banks of the river onto the tile. This is a smaller set, 2 feet by 3 feet. suitable for something like Kill Team or another skirmish type game. I've added the Sector Mechanicus terrain from the Kill Team box set that I put together in episode 2. And I threw some minis on there too to, add to the dynamic, make everything look like it's all supposed to be there, it's all work doing the job together. And yeah, I am just so pleased with this result that I got to put together, and I hope you enjoyed watching me put it together. I will. So there you go, set of tiles I can build on. I'm looking forward to building tiles for other biomes, and I also have an idea for half-width tiles, 12 inches by 6, that I could use as transitions from one biome to another. So for example, I could have city blocks and then these transition tiles to a desert block, and it's nice and smooth without it looking like the city just stopped and the desert started. I do these projects just as much to learn as to actually make something, so I'm going to go over the lessons that I learned with this one. For the crafting side, I learned that plywood was probably not the best way to go. It's heavy and it's really hard to do anything with it without power tools. Next time I'll probably try XPS foam, or maybe just cardboard, carefully cut and textured. Next, using wood glue to stick the raised pads to each tile was probably not a great idea. It gave the tiles a little bit of opportunity to travel while it's set. I'll probably use hot glue next time I try something like this. I also learned that using the kitchen sponge to put the craft paints on, the sponge needs to be damp, not bone dry, in order to really work. And also in that vein, I'm still getting used to those craft paints. They come out quite a bit thicker than the miniature paints that I'm used to, so there's definitely a learning curve. Lastly, I experimented with spraying the white lane lines on some tiles before I painted the grime layer, and on some tiles after I painted the grime layer. The ones where I painted before definitely have a nice natural weathered look to them, but if you join them together, sometimes the grime goes all the way to the edge on one tile and not on another, so it ends up looking incongruous. The ones I painted after are still pretty white and stark, and so next time I do this, I will probably paint all the lines after the grime and then go back and add some grime in a careful way, kind of staying away from the edge where they join together so that they match up no matter which tile you use. On the video production side, I learned that less is more. My first pass at editing the clips down came in at like 45 minutes, and as I started to add in the narration, I realized that was just too long. So I made good use of speeding up footage and cutting out stuff that just didn't serve the purpose of the video. I also learned to save your video editing project often. I lost 45 minutes worth of editing when Blender crashed on me. Lastly, I learned to get your frame rate settings right before you start. I had to scrap just about the entire edit when I realized Blender was at 24 frames instead of 30. That's about it for this project. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I would love to hear any ideas you have for other tile biomes I might make. Also, on the subject of dream projects, is there something you've been wanting to do for a long time and just haven't gotten around to it? If so, I hope this video gives you a little inspiration to jump in. If you enjoyed it, please push the like button. If you'd like to hear more, please push the subscribe button, maybe share. I'm just starting out here, and prevailing wisdom is that's how you get the channel to grow and get bigger, whatever. Also, I wrote a book a few years ago, and I'll have Terry put a link down in the thing to that if you're interested. It's pretty cheap on Amazon. Till next time, take care, everybody.